Jesus had once said in his ministry that where 2 or 3 gather in my name, there I am in their midst. This is a dictum that has formed and informed the history and life of our church throughout its very history. I believe also that it is true that where 2 or 3 of us, people, gather together, we share stories. And it's certainly true whenever I meet people. I think no matter who we are, no matter from whence we've come, our lives are filled with stories. Usually after a brief greeting with someone, we enter into sharing the stories from our lives. Often it can begin with something like, I saw in the paper the other day, or I saw on the TV the other day. And suddenly we have an audience as people settle down to listen to the story that we tell. Now this is not new in human history. As we immerse ourselves into the scripture of this second Sunday of resurrection, we are once again regaled with stories from those early Christian communities who met out in the open in that portico of Solomon, who gathered together to share their experiences of just what had happened and the stories they shared about Peter, the fisherman, and what happened when he passed by. People will remember also just what had occurred, and no doubt when they met family and friends, they would share their experiences. Even the frightened disciples, locked away in that upper room, even they had their stories to tell. And again, as members of that early community, they would share their experiences and their stories. And their stories often would begin with, "We have seen the Lord." And then they would go on to share what had happened to them with the people who perhaps may not have been there. These stories seem almost impossible to believe, as the great doubting Thomas indicated. He would not believe what his brother and sister disciples had told him of that fateful night when Jesus appeared in their midst. An impossible story indeed. Until just 8 days later, Thomas was present when Jesus came again. And this time, he saw and he believed. "My Lord and my God," he would proclaim. Time and again, these are the stories of encounter that we read about in those ancient scriptures, whether it be through the early community experiences that we hear in the Acts of the Apostles, as the early church began to grow and develop, or through the resurrection stories opened up to us through the Gospels, as the frightened disciples once again would meet the risen Christ in their lives. And these frightened disciples once again would be called by Jesus, and then they would be commissioned to spread the good news throughout the world. In all of these, we hear the experiences of those who had seen and heard, and we heard it as they shared their stories with the world. Perhaps a world waiting to hear something about the power of God in their lives. It all happened because people have told their stories. And it all happened because other people chose to listen to those stories. And they would be amazed. And nothing in the world has really changed that much. Today, we are still people of stories. Whenever we get together, we share our stories. We share those experiences with the people that we meet. And when we do that, as we tell our stories, people listen. Today, people still listen to stories, whether we are with family members or friends, or sometimes in the midst of strangers. Whenever anyone begins to tell a story, people stop what they are doing. They listen to what is unfolding before them. And so often, in the telling of that story, people are fascinated. It certainly was the case with those early Christian communities. The disciples at that time had the opportunity to tell people of their experiences of traveling with Jesus on his mission and all that he would say and do for the people around him. And the audiences who gathered with the disciples at that time would also be amazed at what these ordinary people would share with those who came to them. Even the women from the group of disciples had their own stories to tell, and they would share those first stories of resurrection to the men with whom they shared the ministry journey. In all of these stories shared, people would want to be a part of all that they were hearing, and so the community would indeed continue to grow. Today, we are not the first witnesses of the resurrection event, when Jesus entered back into the lives of the disciples. But we are witnesses nonetheless, because we have the stories to share, the stories contained within our scriptures. That's what we share with those who come to us, seeking some sense of being in the presence of God. We can tell our stories. As well as the stories of the gospel, we can share our own experiences of the presence of the risen Lord within our lives, because of what we too have seen and heard. We can all see this in the lives of the people who choose to live in love. We see the power and the presence of the risen Lord in the lives of mums and dads who do so much for the children in their care. These are the stories we share, the stories of the risen Lord in our lives. We share them with the people that we meet. Our simple stories of life and love, of the wonder of the world in which we live, can make a difference in the lives of the people that we meet. We are witnesses today to the presence of the risen Lord in our lives, and all because we have the stories to tell.